Our latest Marvel Snap patch gave us a first look at half a dozen upcoming Marvel Snap designs that we've never seen before, and also gave some updates to 5 other cards we've looked at in the past. Let's go ahead and dig on into the details, shall we? Our first new data mined card is Tombstone, a 4/6 that costs 1 if an enemy card was destroyed last turn. My first impression is that I would be surprised if Tombstone's not a very playable card. Things like Miles Morales and Stature have a lot of parallels to this one, and those cards have regularly seen play in top Marvel Snap decks throughout the course of the game's history. There's a lot of enablers for Tombstone that are just very good Marvel Snap cards in general. Things like Killmonger and Shang-Chi, although a little specific, often generate blowouts and now could get you a 1/6 on top of that. There's also lesser played cards, things like Elektra, Lady Deathstrike, and even Yondu, who's probably the most efficient of enablers. A 1/2 that gives you a little bit of information on what your opponent's doing and also tees up a 1/6 for you the following turn seems very, very reasonable. Our next data mined is Agony, a 1/2 who says after you play a card here, merge this with it. Kind of an inverted Hulkbuster in a way, where you set up Agony before the card you're merging as opposed to setting up your card and then merging Hulkbuster into it. This gives you a little bit more finesse / precision with what you're buffing as well, since Hulkbuster requires a fully open path to play into, whereas Agony could be one of 2 or 3 cards in a path, and then you play something out and she's guaranteed to merge into what you want. A design to call back to is that if you'll recall, Forge being a 1/1 that gave the next cards you played +2 was a design that ultimately ended up being too powerful, and Forge got nerfed back to a 2-drop. And while Agony doesn't leave a body behind, it is a 1 energy card that's going to buff the next thing that you play. I honestly wouldn't be surprised if Agony ends up being better than Hulkbuster in decks like Destroy, since her timing with things like Deadpool and the way the board needs to be set up with is a lot less restrictive, even if she's giving slightly less overall total power. Up next, we have a text box update to Uncle Ben, a 1/2 who now says when this card is destroyed, replace it with Spider-Man. Uncle Ben's previous design added Spider-Man to your hand. Obviously, I think this effect is very good. Enabling this with Killmonger on key turns could lead to some really sweet designs, with Spider-Man popping up and moving something in a way that's unexpected. That being said, those of you who have watched my data mine videos in the past will note that I haven't talked about specific release dates or series for this card or Agony or Tombstone, and that's because for the first time in a long time, none of these data mines actually have dates associated with them for these first 3. It's possible that these are just designs they're updating in their game files for a season far off in the future, but I also think it's a possibility that perhaps we could see 1 or more of these cards released in a non-spotlight cache way over the next few months. We saw Cassandra Nova recently released via Deadpool's Diner, and there's also a reference inside of the game files in our latest patch to something talking about snap packs, which could potentially be a way to get new cards. Obviously, all of this is speculation, so we're going to need to wait and see exactly how that could be in the future, but I think there is a chance that all 3 of these first cards that we looked at could be coming at some point in the not too distant future. Moving along to data mines of cards that do have tentative release dates in the game files, Gorr the God Butcher looks to be slated to be our November Season Pass card, a 6/3 with the ongoing +2 power for each on-reveal card in play. It's noteworthy to start that this looks like it's counting both sides of the board, so Gorr's theoretical maximum in a Christmas land where you have 11 on reveals and they have 12 is 43 points of power. Obviously, the reality is probably going to be somewhere far under that. The way I like to think about scaling 6-drops like this is, okay, how big does this card need to be better than some of the other cleanly enabled options like Red Hulk? With that in mind, the point I would want to think about is, okay, how many on reveals need to be in play for Gorr to, say, have 15 points of power on the last turn of the game? We would need to get to 18 minus 3, so roughly 9-ish on reveals. Most Marvel Snap decks end up having some amount of cards with on reveal in them, so expecting to get 1, 2, or even 3 from your opponent means that we need to consistently have 6 to 7 on reveals on our side of the board to enable Gorr efficiently, and I think that's probably a pretty realistic ask. This could specifically be a card that ends up being very good inside of something like a Werewolf by Night deck, for example, that really loves its on reveals. It's also worth noting that Gorr's -3 base power is something that we can build around mitigating as well. Bast is already in the game, and by the time Gorr gets here, Agent Venom will be yet another card that has a chance to address this card's low base power before it gets into play. And then obviously everybody's favorite meme adjacent card to talk about, Mr. Negative, will be very good with Gorr because it will not only be a 0 energy base 6 power card, but Mr. Negative also happens to play a lot of on reveal cards himself on average. Our first weekly card release in November is looking to be the Fenris Wolf, a 2/3 with the activate resurrect the highest power discarded or destroyed enemy card to your side of this location. Obviously, this looks to be a very powerful anti-Hela or even potentially anti-destroy card, but it's also an effect that you can enable yourself, Shang-Chiing down your opponent's big threat on turns 4 or 5, so you can activate Wolf on turn 6 to get it back. Seems quite strong. I think this card also has potential to have synergy with something like, say, Moon Knight, where you're going to be discarding cards from your opponent's hand that can often be larger as you go into the later turns of the game, trying to snipe something like their 6-drop to then resurrect cleanly on your side of the board. I think with pretty minimal work, this Fenris Wolf has the potential to be a double-digit point slam 2 energy card that just happens to take up 2 spots in the location which it's played at. The one question in my mind about this card is how exactly does the timing window work on activate effects? What I mean by this is on the 6th turn of the game, for example, can I play out a Shang-Chi and then activate my Fenris Wolf, letting me chop down their card and bring it back all in one fell swoop? Or am I going to have to use that Shang-Chi proactively on turns 4 or 5 to then get their card back on the last turn of the game? Our last November card release currently in the data mines is Surtur, a 3/3 with the triggered ability after you play a card with 10 plus power, this gains +4 power. This card seems like an incredibly powerful Scar enabler. As someone who's worked on Scar in a lot of different shells, it's very reasonable to get Scar to 2 energy pretty consistently, but it's often difficult to make him completely free without the aid of extra location variants. Surtur feels like a card that could really change that. You play Surtur on turn 3, you play a 10 power card on turn 4 and turn 5. Now your Surtur is 11 plus points of power, along with the other 2 10 plus power things you played, and your Scar is now completely free and going to trigger Surtur yet again when you play it out on the final turn of the game, letting him scale all the way up to 15 plus points of power. This seems like an incredibly potent 3-drop as templated. Our latest patch also came with text box updates to cards slated to release in September and October compared to the last time that we looked at them, which begets the question, can you truly buff or nerf a card that has yet to release? First up, we have Madam Web still set to release on September 10th, going from a 2/3 down to a 2/1 in the game files while maintaining her ongoing text of you can move one of your cards away from here each turn. My base assumption is that Madam Web was making the move archetype 2 playable in Second Dinner's playtesting, and we all know that archetype has to remain trash. Ayana gets a little bit of a redesign, now a 1/1 whose activate gives the next card you play +2 power and moves it to the right, Her original data mine was giving the previous card that you played the bonus and the movement, and she was also a 2/2. I think I like this design a little bit better. It definitely lets you curve more organically inside of move decks with a perfect draw. You can queue up Arana on the first turn of the game, and then you can play into something like a Human Torch or a Dagger and get moving right away. Scream, still set to release on October 1st, gets a nominal stat increase going from a 2/1 up to a 2/2. Misery gets what I would consider to be a pretty sizable buff, going from a 5/10 down to a 4/7, retaining the on reveal of repeat on reveals of your other cards here and then destroy them. This card obviously still has great synergy with something like Electro, but I think it likely has potential outside of that. An ideal dream curve in my mind would be something like Hood into White Widow into another on reveal into Misery on 4, letting White Widow clog their location again and giving us yet another demon in hand. I think Hood in particular with Misery, especially at this 4 energy stat line, is going to be really potent. One clean way to think about it is you'll spend 1 energy on Hood, 4 on Misery, and then 2 on 2 demons to effectively give you 19 points worth of power for 7 total energy that you can spread out spending over the course of the game. Finally, and I can't believe I get to report on this, they buffed my baby. Toxin is looking to be a 2/1 as opposed to the 3/2 it was originally data mined at. Still with that same on reveal, return your other cards here to your hand. Toxin gets +2 for each one returned. I was excited to have a third bounce card in general, and having it be another 2 energy play is super exciting. This lets you curve out really nicely with a 1 drop on 1, a 2 drop on 2, and then a 1 plus Toxin on turn 3 for maximum bouncy value. As always, thanks for making it to the end of the video. If you enjoyed my roundup on our latest data mined cards coming up, be sure to snap that like button and make sure you're subscribed to this channel so you don't miss any other Marvel Snap game news or my weekly best decks roundups here week in and week out.